Four Seasons Pest Solutions.
When we're talking about the common housefly, we're talking about the gray to black fly with 4 longitudinal lines across the thorax, as can be seen in the picture to my left. Their size range from about 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch long, and their shape is triangular when viewed from above, as can be seen in this picture, with a rounded silhouette in their body, as can be seen in this picture. They are slightly hairy with a single pair of membranous wings. They're actually found throughout the entire world, except for in very, very cold regions like the Arctic regions. In terms of food sources, they live on human food, or the same types of foods that human could eat, or animal food, but can feed on plant and animal matter and human and animal feces. Interestingly, they can only eat liquids as an adult, and therefore they regurgitate digestive fluids onto solid foods to liquefy it. And this is done through the proboscis. And what happens is they actually vomit gastric juices from the stomach region through the proboscis onto the food, and the food is dissolved by this gastric fluid, and then they actually suck this back up through the proboscis like a straw. The life expectancy of houseflies is roughly 15 to 25 days if they have adequate food. Flies can actually pose several threats to humans. Disease is their biggest threat, and these diseases include anthrax, typhoid, salmonella, tuberculosis, cholera, dysentery, and several others. And they can actually spread over 100 pathogens. Another common issue we have with houseflies is food poisoning. They spread bacteria to food products from other places where they have been. So as we talked earlier, through the proboscis, and then again through their feet, we hadn't discussed yet, by landing on garbage and dead animals and feces and feeding, and then coming to your food and doing the same thing. And there's how the germs and bacteria and pathogens are spread. They cannot bite and sting, so the only threat that they pose to humans is the contamination of food. In terms of habits, they can be seen outside, and when outside, they're generally going to be found on plants, trash, fences, trash cans. You see them on the ground. You may see them on vehicles, on the side of the home, or on compost piles, or other places like that. Indoors, they can be seen resting on nearly any surface, and then, they buzz through the air and they aggravate us to death, and we hate that. They're no fun at all to have, especially if you've ever woken up to a fly buzzing all around your head, or if you've tried to sit quietly and read a book, or watch TV, or just take a quick nap, and you've got this fly buzzing around your head, and you grab a fly swat, and then you don't see it again. So we hate flies, and besides the fact that they pose all these threats, they're just quite a nuisance and an annoyance. Now, they prefer to rest near food sources, roughly 4 to 10 feet from the ground. And this is the reason why we place fly lights at about eye level. That is about the perfect place for flies to rest. They will commonly plague outdoor events, weddings and homecomings for churches, and sporting events, places where food is present especially. They're also known to infest farms, poultry coops, dairy farms, and other places when feces is allowed to build up. That causes quite a problem. When speaking of their reproduction and their life cycle, houseflies undergo complete metamorphosis, and they have 4 distinct stages. That's the egg, maggot or larva, the pupal stage, and the adult. Common housefly can overwinter in the larval and pupal stages, especially if there's warm manure piles and other sources of warmth and nutrients close by. In warm conditions, the metamorphosis can be completed in about 7 to 10 days, whereas in the cooler, less hospitable conditions, it may take as much as 2 months. In regions like Kentucky and Tennessee, Virginia, and around the border of these states, 10 to 12 generations may be hatched each year. And that's possible in other states as well, but for our sake here in Kentucky and Tennessee, we know for sure 10 to 12 generations may be hatched each year. Looking at the eggs, they're roughly 1.2 millimeters long, and they're laid by the female one at a time. but in groups or piles of maybe 75 to 100. And she can lay roughly 500 eggs in just a 3 to 4 day period, but several females may actually lay eggs near one another. So this can appear to be a much greater problem than just one fly laying eggs in one spot. When we begin looking at the larvae, we'll see that they're about 4 to 9 millimeters long. They're cylindrical in shape with a sort of off-white color. The body tapers from the bottom towards the head, and at the head there are a set of little hooks located in that area. The larvae go through 3 instars, and they reach roughly 6 to 12 millimeters when they're finally full grown as a maggot. At this time, they have been feeding for quite some time, as a matter of fact, since they hatch from the egg stage, and they develop within 3 to 13 days if the conditions will allow, and if not, they will develop in roughly 13 to 30 days in a less hospitable environment. So they really need an area with high nutrients, like manure, compost piles, and sand or soil that's rich with nutrients to provide the best conditions for the development of the larval stage. But once they're fully developed, the mature maggot will crawl 5 to 50 feet away to a cooler, drier place where breeding material can be found in abundance. And this is where the maggot will continue to metamorphosize into the pupal stage. Now, once it reaches the pupal stage, the last larval exoskeleton is used to form the pupal case in which this stage will complete. Now, this shape takes on more of an oval appearance rather than a long cylindrical appearance, and it's got kind of blunt ends. And this stage lasts roughly 2 to 6 days if the conditions are favorable, and up to 30 days in a less hospitable environment. Once the pupal stage is completed, the adult fly obviously emerges from the pupal casing. This is done by a device on top of the head called the talinum, and it's used to break through the pupal casing. So it kind of swells and shrinks, acting like a sort of hammer, and it beats against the pupal casing until it breaks through. Once the adult emerges, they're about 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch long, with males being the smaller of the two. They're actually easy to tell apart, especially if they're observed closely. The eyes of a male almost touch each other, while females kind of spread apart. They have a space between their eyes. Houseflies don't nest, neither do they colonize. However, we may see them in large quantities at one time. And it's been estimated by scientists that under optimal conditions, it is entirely plausible that one pair of mating flies could potentially produce as many as 191 quintillion offspring between the months of April and October. Those are crazy numbers. Just think of a trillion, and then quadrillion, and then a quintillion. So it's astronomical numbers. I'm sure it's exaggerated, but it's entirely plausible. Flies develop in large number quite commonly, especially in places like farms, poultry farms, dairy farms, and farms similar to that. So if you have a structure, whether it's commercial or residential, that's located nearby a farm or other favorable environment, you might see heavy infestations suddenly, and they may carry on for an extended period of time, and as a matter of fact, may be very difficult to get rid of because the source is coming from somewhere else. So in a case like that, sanitation and other methods that you may try may kill the flies and may make it a less hospitable environment. But when you've got hundreds and thousands of flies coming to the environment from another source, that makes it quite difficult. So this can mean that preventative measures may not work so great, but we still need preventative measures in place. And the first foremost preventative measure is sanitation all the way. Without sanitation, you can forget controlling flies. So we don't need food or other materials left where flies can lay eggs on it and feed on it. We must remove wet manure from farms and even leaving dog and cat feces out in the yard. This is the problem as well. But in farms, feces and manure needs to be moved a minimum of twice per week. Wet straw is a terrible, terrible thing. Wet straw is a strong breeding ground for flies, so don't use it ever for bedding. Garbage cans and dumpsters and other garbage receptacles should have lids that fit tightly and form as much of a seal as possible. And garbage receptacles and trash cans should be located away from structures, at least 20, 30, 40, 50 feet or more if possible. And all garbage should be placed in plastic bags and tightly sealed up before discarding it. Another good way to prevent flies would be by window screens in the windows, especially if you're going to have the windows open. And don't open the doors and just leave them wide open, because flies are going to get in that way as well. When it comes to DIY control, most DIY control is going to be unsuccessful. The best DIY control for small infestations is obviously the fly swat. In large infestations, if it's a infestation that comes along quickly and isn't sourced from an outside area where we have a repeated and consistent source coming in, you may be able to try a DIY fogger or something of that nature, sprayed into the air to kill the flies quickly. Maybe over-the-counter baits may work in some situations, but in most cases, once you get past just a few flies, you're probably going to need professional help. And here at Four Seasons Pest Solutions, we have developed our Eismer fly control program. It works great, has a wonderful guarantee behind it, and you'll love it. It begins with inspection, identification, sanitation, structural modification, mechanical control, and then residual control. Once all of these measures are in place, flies really don't have much of a chance for survival. So if you're dealing with flies, just remember this. It's okay to live among pests, but with Four Seasons Pest Solutions, you won't have to live with them. Have a great day.
Any pest, any season, we're the solution.